Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a lot less of a article by article breakdown of what I think is wrong with comedy and media in general. It's more or less just my opinion on the current state of pop culture, I suppose. I present with you, at least in my opinion, the least funny television host currently employed by any of the major networks. I won't say the least funny individual on the face of the earth, because I have worked with less witty individuals than Trevor Noah. But I guess we'd have to see, if he didn't have his entire staff of writers and producers behind him, just how untalented he truly is. Like I've stated in a previous rant, the modern state of media is just about as bad as it's ever been. Mostly, I think it's due to the overwhelming political influence of everything. It's a part of the communist doctrine that there needs to be politics in everything. And I think that's the problem basically with professional sports now, how they've become, well, just absolute ratings catastrophes. There hasn't been a decent sitcom on TV at least in 20, 25 years. When was the last one that was actually universally praised? Seinfeld? I'll take Friends maybe, but that was 2000 maybe, I think. I don't know, I didn't watch either of them, but people truly enjoy Seinfeld, Friends, Curb Your Enthusiasm, but they're all just so highly political, and that's what I think The Daily Show, its biggest sin. Not that the fact that it's totally unfunny, but everybody seemed to praise or get their news from the Jon Stewart incarnation, and it was not what you people remember it as. It was still just an ideological dive way back when. You remember all the softball interviews that he had with Hillary Clinton, especially the Joe Biden one that's making the rounds now, how he could have had Joe Biden on the ropes when he was breaking down his... I mean, you got the first mainstream, black, articulate, clean individual running for president. That's a storybook, man. Something like that. I got most of the quote correct, but instead of actually pressing him on that and his opinion on busing or not wanting his children to go to, and I quote Joe Biden, a racial jungle in schools he's referring to. No, instead of pressing him on that, he'd be mocking Fox News, and Fox News was not even nearly as big as it is now, and that's how The Daily Show got popular. It was LARPing about, claiming how it was actually presenting biased left-leaning coverage, but at least they'd tell you the fact, and they would mock the tagline of Fox News as being fair and balanced. But fast forward 5 years from when Jon Stewart retired to now, when you have that fucking human disaster hosting the show, nobody's watching it anymore. Nobody really takes it seriously. The only time it pops up in any sort of a circle is when Trevor Noah makes some kind of half-hearted plea or cry about race or guns or debates Tommy Lahren. That was the last time that I even heard The Daily Show brought up. But I was thinking of how big of an impact The Daily Show and all of its correspondents have made on, well, at least modern media, modern cable news. Like, okay, who sprung out of the Jon Stewart Daily Show? Because it's not the original incarnation. Craig Kilborn hosted it for a few years, so he was the second host and really made it explode in popularity. So guys who came out of that system were Lewis Black, Steve Carell, Larry Wilmore, Samantha Bee. The list goes on and on. All of those guys went on to have their own shows, and Steve Carell has become a stand-in for Mike Myers or Jim Carrey's crazy ass. Depends on how you really want to look at it, but he's become the go-to comedy figure for the past decade, which I think is also to a detriment of modern movies, but that's just my opinion. I don't find that brand of humor funny. I like my humor pointed, vicious, and irrelevant to politics, really. But one guy who was in that early Daily Show circuit was Steve Colbert. I didn't forget about him when I was listing off everybody. I was saving him for this such situation. Because there was also another comedy show in the early 2000s. It was Tough Crowd, in case you haven't heard of it. It was hosted by Colin Quinn. It had the likes of Nick DiPaolo, Patrice O'Neill, Greg Giraldo, Jim Norton. Guys who were very, very funny. And Steve Colbert was semi-regular on the show. He made quite a few appearances, and everybody had great things to say about him. And compare and contrast that with what he's doing with the old David Letterman show is I don't know, it's fucking bonkers. It just goes to show you that put a little bit of money in front of people and they will say anything that you want. And by people, I mean actors, because they're all basically empty vessels. What you've seen with all of the PSAs lately since the lockdown has started, and the video that I just did yesterday perfectly encapsulated that. Like, who the fuck is gonna want to vote for a Democrat when you have, what, a bunch of fat, out of shape creeps and nude, and the best thing you can do is pull a 50-year-old set of Jew tits? Like, I don't fucking know where their heads are at. But instead of getting actual laughs, and here's the entire crux of this argument, they have all settled for getting claps, getting approving nods from the audience, because they figured out the formula. They figured out that if you insert this and then you add this, it gets this approval from your base. And they aren't trying to appeal to anybody else anymore, because Jon Stewart was excessively successful at honing his core audience of young leftists and never wanting to stray outside of that. That's what modern media has become. And you also see that play out in the music industry as well. Something I'm very passionate about and don't really get a big opportunity to talk about, because everybody that I like has, well, not been relevant in the industry for a long time, but fuck it, whatever. Like, my favorite bands are Priest, Rolling Stones, Sabbath, Accept. Noticing a trend here, everything that's kind of like, music for me kind of stopped about 1990, and it's a shame that nobody that formed a band previous to 1990 has put out anything new. It's, yeah, man, I don't know. I kid, of course. What I'm saying about the formula, like how Jon Stewart figured out the formula in order to grow his base, or rather to hone his base and not grow it outside of that, and then it creates all these little tribes out there. That's what happened with the music industry in the early 90s with grunge. Grunge figured out the perfect mathematical equation for perfecting the art of radio rock, which we are still dealing with 30 years past the advent of grunge. Perfectly figured out the formula, and it's just been little tweaks on that since then. And for all intents and purposes, rock and roll is now dead because it's followed that stupid pattern with absurd regularity. It's changed a little bit now and then, but it always returns to that same formula, the Nickelback formula, the Black Keys formula. Don't try to tell me fucking Jack White's some kind of a virtuoso. The fucking guy makes mediocre music, and I won't hear anything besides that. There's no risks taken anymore, and that's what's missing in comedy, that's what's missing in music. And now I'll finish up with movies. I think that they figured out the formula in probably the 1980s with the big action films. Most of those action films I love and cherish too, with Rambo, with all of Schwarzenegger stuff. Tell me the difference between Commando, Red Heat, Predator, Total Recall. They all have the same basic plot. It's just they were all really exciting and really fresh at the time. And then in the 90s, you had Jean-Claude Van Damme take over, you had Steven Seagal take over, and they were doing essentially the exact same movie over and over again, just recycled from the 80s into the 90s. And now it's really hard to differentiate between the early 2000s, the 10s, and whatever the fuck we have left now of the Hollywood industry. Now it's just all kind of morphed into the exact same superhero movie. What's the difference between Iron Man 1, 2, and 3, or Thor, or even over on the DC side of the fence outside of the Dark Knight trilogy? Even still include that, that's the same fundamental plot line that gets recycled over and over again. That's what makes everything so boring. Once you find out the formula, it'll only work for so long. And we've seen it take over the movie industry, we've seen it take over the music industry, and that's what's happening now with modern television. There hasn't been an original thought in decades, and that's why alternative tech's taken off. That's why YouTube's taken off, and that's why they're so keen on, and when I say they, it's all of these people who have grown up on this shit, who went to college and got these bunk studies and have these terrible ideologies ingrained into their head, the intersectionality, critical race theory, that whole cabal of people. So when I say they, that's what I mean. They see this as the safe path. They don't want to ruffle any feathers, and they just want to further drive down their ideology without letting anything else come out from the sides. And that's why we're walking a fine line on YouTube here. where our opinions can get knocked off at any minute. And that's why reforming 230 is so goddamn important. And that's why our speech deserves to be just as protected, because it's something new, it's something different, and it's something that you can't plug into a system in order to make it successful. You have to succeed on the merits of your own thoughts and ideas. Something that's lacking for something that's ironically named critical theory. But that's just the rant I wanted to have on media, and God, Trevor Noah is just the most unfunny human being alive, and perfectly encapsulates what I'm thinking when I think of the death of media. But if you guys also have another opinion, or if you want to refine this thought, feel free to drop that in the comment section down below. I'd love to discuss this situation. It's just a rough thought that I've been working on for quite a long time, and I think it fits in quite nice with describing what the fuck is going on out there. So once again, I thank you very much for the gift of your time. Y'all are really helping me grow this channel, and I feel very, very optimistic about the future. I've been Don Consuelo. I want you guys to follow your gut and get after it. Take care, everyone.